Imagine the Allfather, Odin, his unmatched mind fogging with dementia. Imagine Thor, the strongest of all, unable to lift his own hammer because his joints are crippled with severe arthritis. Imagine the golden realm of Asgard crumbling into dust, not from a grand war, but from the slow, suffocating decay of old age. The gods of Norse mythology were not naturally immortal. They were terrifyingly vulnerable. Underneath their shining armor and immense power, their bodies were subject to the exact same ravages of time as any mortal human. They bled, they tired, and they aged. There was only one thing keeping them young, one deeply guarded secret that maintained their status as supreme beings, and one day, that secret was stolen. Hair turned white, skin sagged. Asgard began to die. And it was all because of one man, Loki. To understand how the gods almost met a pathetic, withered end, you have to understand the source of their power. Her name was Idunn. She was the goddess of youth, spring, and rejuvenation. But her true power did not lie in her hands. It lay in a simple, unassuming wooden box made of ash wood. Inside this box were the golden apples. These were not ordinary fruits. They were the literal lifeblood of the Aesir. When a god felt a twinge of pain in their knee, they went to Idunn. When they found a single gray hair on their head, they went to Idunn. One bite of a golden apple, and the clock was reset. Wrinkles vanished. Vitality surged. The apples were their battery, their fountain of youth. Idunn guarded them fiercely, and she never left the safety of Asgard's walls. But safety is an illusion when the enemy is already inside your gates. The disaster began far away from Asgard, in the rugged, wild lands of Midgard. Odin, the god of wisdom, Hoenir, the god of silence, and Loki, the god of mischief, were on a journey. The terrain was harsh, the mountains were steep, the wind was biting. After days of relentless travel, their stomachs were completely empty, the kind of hunger that gnaws at your sanity. Descending into a valley, their luck seemed to change. They spotted a herd of wild oxen grazing in the distance. Without hesitation, they slaughtered the largest beast. They built a massive fire, dug a pit, and prepared an earth oven. The flames roared. The heat was intense. The gods sat back, mouths watering, waiting for their feast. Hours passed. The fire burned down to glowing embers. Odin gave the signal. Loki pulled the meat from the pit. It was completely raw. Blood pooled in the dirt. The fat was unrendered. The muscle was tough and cold. It made no sense. They had built a fire hot enough to melt iron. Confused but starving, they rebuilt the fire. They added more wood. They stoked the flames higher than before. They waited even longer. Again, they pulled the meat out. Again, it was ice cold and raw. Magic. Dark, powerful magic was at play. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the canopy above. A deep, resonant, mocking voice. The gods looked up into the branches of a massive, ancient oak tree. Sitting near the top was an eagle. But this was no ordinary bird. It was gargantuan. Its feathers were like iron plates. Its eyes held a cruel, ancient intelligence. The eagle looked down at the starving gods and spoke. It claimed responsibility. It was using its own magic to suppress the heat of the fire. The meat would never cook, the eagle said, unless the gods agreed to a deal. The eagle wanted a share of the feast. Odin, pragmatic and exhausted, agreed. Food was food. Instantly, the spell lifted. The meat sizzled. The rich smell of roasted ox filled the valley. But before the gods could even draw their knives, the eagle swooped down from the tree. It didn't take a small portion. It didn't take a polite share. The massive bird grabbed the two best legs and both shoulders of the ox, the absolute best cuts of meat. In one swift motion, it devoured the lion's share of their hard-earned meal. Loki snapped. His pride was fragile, and his temper was volatile. Driven by hunger and rage, Loki grabbed a massive, heavy branch from the ground. He swung it with all his divine strength, aiming directly for the eagle's back. He wanted to shatter the bird's spine. Instead, he sealed his own doom. The branch struck the eagle, but it didn't bounce off. It stuck fast, like it was forged to the bird's feathers. Loki tried to let go of the branch, but his hands were glued to the wood. Panic set in. The eagle shrieked, a sound that shook the trees and launched itself into the sky. Loki was ripped from the ground. The eagle didn't fly high into the clouds. It flew low, deliberately low. It dragged Loki through the brutal terrain. His boots smashed against jagged boulders. His knees tore through thorny thickets. His ribs cracked against the trunks of massive pine trees. Loki screamed in absolute agony. He was a god, but he was being battered like a rag doll. He begged for mercy. He pleaded for the bird to stop. The eagle landed on a high, desolate crag. Loki lay bleeding, his bones fractured, his breath ragged. The eagle looked at him, and its form began to shift. The feathers melted away. The beak stretched and flattened. Standing over Loki was not a bird, but a terrifying frost giant. His name was Thiazi, and he had orchestrated this entire encounter. Thiazi didn't want the ox. He didn't care about the meat. He wanted leverage. He looked down at the broken god of mischief and made his demand. He would let Loki live. He would unbind his hands. But in exchange, Loki had to deliver a prize. The ultimate prize. Thiazi wanted Idunn, and he wanted her golden apples. Loki knew exactly what this meant. Handing over Idunn meant handing over the life force of Asgard. It was high treason. It was a death sentence for the gods. But Loki was bleeding. He was in pain. And above all else, Loki only truly cared about his own survival. He looked at the towering frost giant and swore a solemn oath. He would bring Idunn outside the walls of Asgard. Thiazi smiled. The magic broke. Loki's hands were free. Loki limped back to Asgard, his mind racing. He had to formulate a plan. Idunn was cautious. She knew her worth. She never stepped foot outside the divine realm. The walls of Asgard were her sanctuary. Loki knew he couldn't force her. He had to manipulate her. He had to use her dedication to her craft against her. Days later, Loki approached Idunn's gardens. He put on his most charming, innocent face. He told her a lie crafted with absolute precision. Loki claimed that while wandering in a forest just beyond the walls of Asgard, he had stumbled upon a miraculous discovery. A wild tree, bearing apples that glowed with a golden light. He told Idunn that these wild apples looked identical to hers. He even suggested with a feigned whisper that they might be more powerful than hers. Idunn was immediately defensive. Her apples were unique in all the 9 realms. There was no way wild fruit could match her ash box. Loki smiled inwardly. He had hooked her. He challenged her to prove him wrong. He told her to bring her wooden box, to step just outside the gates and compare her apples to the ones he had found. Driven by professional pride and curiosity, Idunn made the worst mistake of her life. She picked up her ash box. She followed Loki out of the gardens. She walked past the grand halls. She stepped through the massive gates of Asgard. The moment her foot touched the soil outside, the trap was sprung. The sky instantly darkened. A violent, freezing wind whipped through the trees. Loki stepped back, a cowardly smirk on his face. From the clouds above, a massive shadow descended. It was Thiazi, back in his monstrous eagle form. Before Idunn could even scream, the giant bird swooped down. Razor-sharp talons wrapped around her waist. The wind knocked the breath from her lungs. In a fraction of a second, she was pulled into the freezing sky. The golden apples, the ash box, and the goddess of youth were gone. Loki casually walked back into Asgard, pretending he had seen nothing. At first, no one noticed. The gods were busy with their feasts, their battles, their politics. But time, without Idunn, moves differently. It started subtly. Freyja, the goddess of beauty, noticed a dullness in her skin. Thor swung his hammer, Mjolnir, and felt a strange, sharp pain in his shoulder. Odin woke up with a deep, aching weariness in his bones that sleep could not cure. Days turned into weeks. The subtle changes became a horrifying reality. The gods were aging. And they were aging fast. Golden hair turned to brittle gray. Smooth, radiant skin became deeply wrinkled and papery. The grand halls of Asgard, usually filled with booming laughter and the clashing of weapons, fell completely silent. The gods were moving slowly. They walked with canes. They hunched over. Their eyesight dimmed. Their hearing faded. Panic gripped the divine realm. They realized they were dying. The illusion of their supreme divinity was shattered. They were decaying, rotting from the inside out. Odin, his mind desperately fighting through the fog of old age, called a council. The gods gathered. It was a pathetic sight. A room full of crippled, elderly beings, terrified of the impending dark. Odin demanded to know where Idunn was. They traced her steps. They asked the guards. They pooled their failing memories. And one undeniable fact emerged. Idunn was last seen walking out of the gates, and she was walking right beside Loki. The frail, elderly gods did not ask Loki to join the council. They dragged him in. Thor, though weakened, still possessed enough strength to break a neck. He grabbed Loki by the throat and slammed him against a stone pillar. The other gods surrounded him. Their eyes were milky with cataracts, but they burned with absolute, murderous rage. They didn't ask for an explanation. They gave him an ultimatum. "Tell us where she is," Odin rasped, his voice thin and hollow. "Bring her back, or we will chain you to a rock and torture you until the stars burn out." Loki looked at the decaying faces of his peers. He saw no mercy. He knew his silver tongue couldn't save him this time. They had nothing left to lose. He confessed everything. He told them about the uncooked meat, the eagle, the beating, the bargain, and the kidnapping. He told them Thiazi had her locked away in Thrymheim, the freezing, mountainous fortress of the frost giants. The gods demanded a solution. Loki had one. He turned to Freyja. Despite her withered, elderly appearance, her magical artifacts remained potent. Loki asked to borrow her falcon cloak, a magical garment that allowed the wearer to transform into a bird of prey. Freyja handed it over without hesitation. "Bring her back," she whispered, her voice cracking with age, "or don't come back at all." Loki donned the cloak. His body shrank, feathers sprouted, his vision sharpened. He launched himself into the sky, leaving the dying realm of Asgard behind. He flew north, toward Jotunheim, toward the realm of the giants. The journey was brutal. The air grew colder with every mile. Ice formed on his wings. The winds howled, trying to smash his tiny falcon body against the jagged peaks of the mountains. But fear is a powerful motivator. Loki knew that if he failed, Thor would rip him apart piece by piece. Finally, the dark, menacing towers of Thrymheim came into view. It was a fortress of solid ice and black stone. Loki circled the highest tower, looking for a way in. He landed softly on a frozen windowsill and peered inside. Luck, for once, was on his side. Thiazi was not there. The giant had gone out to sea to fish in the freezing waters. Inside the room, sitting on a block of ice, was Idunn. She was shivering, crying, clutching her ash box to her chest. She looked exactly the same. The magic of the apples kept her eternally youthful, even in this freezing hell. Loki hopped into the room and transformed back into his natural shape. Idunn recoiled in horror. She knew he was the one who had betrayed her. Loki didn't have time to apologize. He didn't have time to explain. He told her they were leaving, right now. But there was a massive problem. Loki was about to turn back into a falcon. A falcon cannot carry a full-grown goddess and a wooden box across the 9 realms. The physics simply didn't work. He needed magic. Loki muttered an ancient, complex incantation. He pointed his hands at Idunn. In a flash of blinding light, the goddess of youth vanished. In her place, resting on the icy floor, was a single, small nut. Loki had compressed her, along with the apples, into a tiny, weightless shell. He threw the falcon cloak over his shoulders, transformed back into a bird, and gripped the nut tightly in his sharp talons. He launched himself out of the window, diving into the freezing wind, flying south toward Asgard as fast as his wings could beat. He was making good time. He thought he was in the clear. But down on the freezing ocean, Thiazi looked up. The giant had sharp eyes. He saw the tiny speck of a falcon leaving his tower. He knew instantly what had happened. His prize was being stolen. Rage boiled in the giant's blood. He dropped his nets. He transformed back into the gargantuan eagle. The sheer force of his wings taking off created a shockwave that shattered the ice on the water. The chase had begun. Loki was fast, but Thiazi was a force of nature. The eagle's wingspan was massive. Every single flap covered miles of sky. Loki looked back over his tail feathers and his blood ran cold. The eagle was gaining on him, fast. The sky darkened as Thiazi's massive shadow fell over Loki. The wind from the eagle's wings created a turbulent vortex, tossing the tiny falcon around like a leaf in a hurricane. Loki pumped his wings desperately. His heart felt like it was going to explode. His muscles burned. The nut in his talons felt suddenly heavy. Back in Asgard, the elderly gods had gathered on the massive stone walls. They were leaning on their spears, squinting into the northern horizon. Then they saw it. A tiny brown speck, flying erratically, and right behind it, a terrifying massive black shape. Odin realized what was happening. Loki was losing the race. If Thiazi caught him, the apples were gone forever. Asgard would fall. The gods had to act, and they had to act right now. Odin barked orders. The gods moved with a desperate, frantic energy they didn't know they still possessed. They gathered massive piles of wood, pine shavings, dry kindling, barrels of pitch. They piled it all along the top of the massive stone walls of Asgard. They created a perimeter of pure fuel. They stood by with torches, their trembling hands waiting for the perfect moment. Loki was mere seconds away. Thiazi was right behind him. The eagle opened its massive razor-sharp beak. It extended its iron-like talons. It was inches away from snapping Loki out of the sky. Loki folded his wings. He went into a dead dive. He plummeted toward the walls of Asgard like a stone. He cleared the top of the wall by mere inches. "Now?" Odin screamed. The gods threw their torches onto the piles of wood. The dry pine and pitch ignited instantly. A massive, roaring wall of fire erupted into the sky. A curtain of pure, blistering heat. Loki, being small and fast, had already slipped past. But Thiazi was massive, and he was flying far too fast to stop. The giant eagle tried to pull up, backpedaling furiously in the air, but his momentum was unstoppable. Thiazi crashed directly into the wall of flames. The fire caught his feathers instantly. The iron-like plumes ignited like dry paper. The eagle shrieked in agony, completely blinded by the smoke and fire. His wings gave out. The massive, burning bird plummeted over the wall and crashed violently into the courtyard of Asgard. The impact shook the ground. Thiazi rolled in the dirt, his body engulfed in flames, desperately trying to extinguish the fire. He didn't get the chance. The gods descended upon him. They were old, they were frail, but they were armed, and they were furious. Thor lifted Mjolnir with both hands, his arthritic joints popping, and brought it down on the eagle's skull. Odin drove his spear, Gungnir, into the beast's chest. Tyr hacked with his sword. In a matter of seconds, the giant was dead. The threat was eliminated. Loki landed in the center of the courtyard. He dropped the nut onto the grass. The magic dissipated. Idunn appeared, gasping for air, terrified, clutching her ash box. The gods dropped their weapons. They surrounded her. They didn't speak. They just looked at her with desperate, hollow eyes. Idunn understood. She opened the wooden box. The golden glow of the apples illuminated the courtyard. She handed one to Odin. She handed one to Thor. She handed them out to every god present. They bit into the flesh of the fruit. The magic was instantaneous. The gray color bled out of their hair, replaced by vibrant gold, red, and black. Deep wrinkles smoothed out like ripples on a calm pond. Crooked, aching spines straightened. The fog lifted from their minds. The sheer, terrifying weight of old age evaporated in a matter of seconds. The gods stood tall once again. Their muscles bulged. Their eyes shone with divine light. They were young. They were powerful. They were immortal once more. But the atmosphere in the courtyard was not one of celebration. It was one of profound, sobering silence. As they looked down at the charred corpse of the giant Thiazi, and then at the small wooden box in Idunn's hands, a chilling realization settled over them. They were the masters of the universe. They commanded the lightning, the seas, and the dead. But without a simple gardener and her golden fruit, they were nothing but frail, dying mortals. Their eternal glory was not a birthright. It was a fragile, borrowed time. And for the rest of their days, the gods of Asgard would never, ever forget how close they came to fading away into the dust.
If you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe button for more.